Good morning, everyone. This morning, I would like to share a couple of thoughts with you from God's Word, something that has been on my heart for quite some time, and it's really been inspired by something that I've been hearing very often at this season. A very pressing question at this time, which is, where is God? Where is God in all that is going on, in all this suffering, in all this brokenness and chaos? If there is such a good God out there, why are all these things happening? Which is a, very understandable question to which there are very, very direct answers. And but this morning I would like to focus on a question that is equally important, equally pressing, but even more urgent, which is God with you at this season? And is he standing in your corner? Does he have your back? Can you expect his protection at this very difficult time? Or are you facing this season with fear and anxiety, feeling like your life is out of your control and standing on very shaky ground at the moment? And if that is the case, how can we change that? How can we make sure that God has our back, that He's watching over us? How can we put ourselves in a position where we can expect His intervention and protection and favor upon our lives? And today we're going to be looking at this. We're going to be answering this big, pressing, urgent question by looking at the life of someone from the Bible, someone who knew what it meant to have God in his corner, but also who knew the exact opposite, someone who had a taste of both. And just by looking at his life and looking at his choices, we're going to answer ourselves the big question, is God actually with me at the moment? And if he is not, what must I do to change that? Now, I'm not going to be reading the whole passage because it covers three quite large chapters, and for reasons of time we can't really read them all, although I would really encourage you to read them all for yourselves, maybe after this message. And they're found in the second book of Chronicles, and they're chapters 14, 15 and 16. Now, these are chapters that summarize the government and kingship of King Asa. Now, King Asa was famous for having realigned the nation of the southern kingdom of Judah. Back in those days, Israel was split into, there was the northern kingdom of Israel and then the southern kingdom of Judah. And Asa was very famous for having realigned the southern kingdom of Judah, the section of the kingdom that he had authority over, back to God, and lead the nation into a season of great peace and prosperity and favor from God. But it's interesting how whenever we think about Israel as a region, as a nation, we often think and talk about it in terms of holy nation, the holy land of Israel. I say it's interesting because for the vast majority of the time that it was under Israel's control, it was not holy, despite the fact that God had called them to become representatives of His holiness, despite the fact that God had called them to become living examples of the betterness of living under His rule and divine government. Israel often rebelled. For the vast majority of its time, it rebelled against God. And instead of shining with God's light, a light of justice, of righteousness, a light of holiness, for the surrounding nations to see, instead of doing that, they did the exact opposite, which is embracing the darkness of the idolatry and paganism of the surrounding nations. Now, you may think of it in very light terms, what's the big deal? They're free to do whatever they want. Why do they have to stick with one God? Couldn't they worship something else or give themselves to other religions? Let me tell you what they did. If you were to read the Bible, if you were to read the Old Testament, you quickly discover how abominable those idolatrous practices were. And not only they were abominable to God, but they would be abominable to us in the 21st century. In fact, a lot of it was a violation of human rights. There was a lot of human sacrifices and a lot of other practices of the more sexual nature that again would have been considered as abuse, would have been really shunned by today's society. Obviously, because we might as well have children watching this service and listening to me. I'm not going to give you any details, but if you're an adult, I'm pretty sure that you can kind of picture what I am talking about. And that's kind of the spiritual background, the religious background in which King Asa grew up. His fathers, in fact, rejected the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, their very, very first fathers and founders. They rejected the God of Israel to embrace all sorts of abominable deity along with their practices. But Asa did not accept that. Asa realized the betterness of living under God's government and under his rule and under his leadership. And so he rejected all that. He rejected the spiritual inheritance that he had inherited from his father and the father before him, and decided to realign himself to God. Rediscover him for himself, realign himself to his will and his law and his purposes, and not only that, lead the nation to do the same. And so in the first few years of his kingship, Asa led the nation through a season of a radical, really deep spiritual reformations. He put an end to all of the abominable practices that I've mentioned only a few moments ago. He destroyed pagan worship and the objects of worship themselves, from temples to shrines to high places. He restored the worship of the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He restored the temple that had fallen in disuse. He repaired the altar and restored justice and righteousness across the land. He basically put away anything that was an offense to God. And in verse 16, we even read that he put away his mother from being queen over Israel. Why? Because she, like his father and his father before him, embraced that paganism and was a major promoter of it across the land. He went even as far as deposing his own mother from being queen. And the rest of the chapter 14, from verse 6 and onwards, it really tells us how much of an impact across the nation, across different spheres of Israel's life, how much of an impact this decision, this realignment made. And obviously for the better. We read in verse 6 of chapter 14 that Asa had no war in those years, for the Lord gave him peace. So they built and they prospered, because war seized the king's attention. The nation's efforts were able to be focused on something other than war. And rather than destroying things, they started to build things up and to strengthen themselves, strengthen their economy, strengthen their infrastructure, strengthen systems, and just strengthen people's quality of life. And things in Judah, in the southern kingdom of Judah, became so good. Standards of living and prosperity became so good that we read in that same chapter that many inhabitants of nations that would otherwise be at war with the southern kingdom of Judah actually defected to the kingdom of Judah, hearing just how better life was under the rule and reign of King Asa. We read that great numbers deserted to him when they saw that the Lord his God was with him. Okay? King Asa knew what it meant to have God on his side. Okay? He knew what it meant to know that God was with him. And but something that is interesting here and that is worth considering is that all these beautiful things that we often strive in life, all these beautiful things that we may be striving after as individuals or even as entire communities, as entire nations, you know, these goals that somehow are very high on the list of every nation, every human being on the planet, they were all byproducts of the nation's realignment to God. Peace, prosperity, progress, growth, okay, better quality of life, all these things that we strive after, they were all the byproducts of the nation's realignment to God. And this really highlights two major mistakes that we often make in our pursuit of happiness, if you like. The first one is that we try to do it the other way around. Very often our internal reasoning is, well, if God's gonna bless me, if God's gonna make life go my way, then I will consider following him. I will consider embracing him. I will consider realigning myself to him. But as we've seen in this passage, as well as in the rest of the Bible, that's a wrong approach. It's an upside down approach to blessing. Blessings never come prior to an experience of God and a realignment to him. They always come as a byproduct of such a realignment. And so instead of just searching for these blessings in a vacuum and independence from him, we should actually start by restoring our relationship with him. And then everything else will flow quite naturally. So yeah, we cannot seek these blessings first we seek a realignment with God, and even more importantly, we cannot seek these blessings or find them in isolation from God. Okay, we cannot expect the blessing without the blesser. Are you with me? We cannot expect any blessings without a realignment to the blesser. And so yeah, this is why there is so much frustration out there in the world. This is why there is so much lack of satisfaction, because we're striving after things that only a realigned and restored relationship with our God can provide. And yes, we may get a foretaste of these things. Yes, we may have a little slither of that cake that actually belongs to God, but all of that experience will only be temporary and short-lived. If we want the real deal, if we want the true blessing, if we want a true season of peace and prosperity and protection and favor upon our life, we must start by realigning ourselves with our God. But Asa, as he realigned himself and the rest of the nation back to God, not only experienced a season of peace and prosperity, but also a season of victory. Even though we're told that for the initial years, Asa didn't experience any war because God's hand was upon him. We're also told that at one point a coalition was formed between Ethiopia and Libya, because obviously they heard about all the good things that were happening in the kingdom of Judah and the prosperity that was there, and obviously they thought, let's go and grab some of that. And so they formed a coalition, and together they invaded the land of Judah with an incredible army, 1 million foot soldiers. Okay, now that's a big number for us today, even greater back in those days, in ancient times, where a large army counted hundreds of thousands, never a million. In fact, I think that this is probably the first time in scripture that we come across such a big number with regards to a military force, with regards to an army. And that in itself tells us that even if God is with us, doesn't necessarily mean that trouble will not find us. Trouble will always find us, because we live in a broken world, and as such, brokenness will touch us sometimes. It will reach us sometimes. And realities that anybody else would find threatening, they will threaten our lives as well too. But the thing is that if God is with us, he has the last word over our life, and not those threatening realities. And that's exactly what King Asa experienced at that particular time. He knew he was wildly outnumbered, but he went out with his few. He went out to face this army, knowing that God was with him. And when he saw the sheer extent, the sheer size of the army, we read that Asa cried out to God. Chapter 14, verse 11, we read this cry: "O Lord, there is none like you to help between the mighty and the weak. Help us, O Lord, our God, for we rely on you. And in your name we have come against this multitude. O Lord, you are our God. Let not man prevail against you." And we read that God stepped in. We're not told exactly how he did it, whether it was an infusion of courage and strength on Asa's army, or whether he brought confusion and division between the Ethiopians and the Libyans. We don't really know, but what we are told in verse 13 is that they were broken before the Lord and his army. And so God brought about an incredible victory. Everybody acknowledged that it was God, because the odds were all stacked against Asa and his army. They just did not have the military strength to push back these invaders, but thanks to God they managed to do so. But you see, this realignment to God not only brought a season of peace and prosperity upon the land, as well as a season of victory, but it was really essentially a season of choice. And this became evident when the prophet Azariah addressed King Asa with a word from God following that battle. A word that kind of confirmed the wisdom of Asa's decision in wanting to realign himself to God as well as the rest of the nation, but also a word that would kind of set the direction and the tone for the rest of his kingship. And again, it's a bit of a lengthy prophecy, but I thought I would just read the first few verses, because this is what I would like us to focus on a little bit more this morning. And he says in chapter 15, verse 2, "The Lord is with you while you are with him." Okay, so this is God speaking to King Asa through the prophet Azariah. The Lord is with you while you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. So, with just one verse, with the first introductory line of this prophecy, God kind of emphasized to Asa that the prosperity, the peace, the victory, the favor that was just being bestowed upon him and the nation were the byproduct of a choice to be realigned to him. Okay? The Lord is with you while you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. So, going back to our original question, is God with us? Is God with me? Is God with you? We can only answer it by answering another question, a secondary question upon which the first one is conditional. That is, am I with God? Before I should ask myself the question, has he got my back? I should ask myself, have I got his back? Am I in his camp? Am I realigned to him? Am I following him? Am I with him? And so as I have to ask myself this question, basically every single day, I want to ask you the same question. Are you with him today? I'm going to pause just for a second to get you to be a bit real with yourself. Is God with you? How are you feeling as you ask yourself this question, or as you hear me asking that question? Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel confident that you are with him? And because you're with him, you know that he is with you, that he's got your back, that he's in your corner? Or are you not? Because particularly at this season, we want to make sure that God's got our back. As things that we place our confidence in are being shaken, as our sense of security is kind of being thrown out of the window, it's important that we're able to say, yeah, God's got my back. And even if I were to come to the end of myself, God would catch me, God would carry me, and God would deliver me. And he would enable me to always land on my feet and be victorious no matter what life or this virus throws at me. But if you're unable to give a definitive yes, or if your yes is a bit shaky and it's a bit unsure, maybe you're only able to say, maybe I am not sure if I am with God and if God is with me, then we want to really hear what the rest of this chapter is actually telling us. We really want to look at the life of Asa and learn from him how he realigned himself with God, how he moved from not being with him to being with him again, that God might be with Asa himself. And Asa really did three simple things. First of all, he learned again who God is, the God of his forefathers. He had to relearn it for himself, because he certainly didn't learn it from his father and mother, nor his grandfather and grandmother. So he had to rediscover God for himself, and not just who he is, but what his will is. Then what did he do? He put away everything that wasn't according to his will. And finally, he actually put in practice everything that was according to God's will. He obeyed his will. But what does that mean for us 21st century people? Well, for us, it simply means that, just like King Asa, we need to rediscover God for ourselves, and not just who he is, but his will, what he deems right and what he deems wrong. His way of life for us, because that's the secret. Realignment simply means not living life our way anymore, but living life God's way. Realignment simply means moving away from my will be done to thy will be done. And there is no better way for us to rediscover God or discover God for the very first time, and not just who he is, but his will, by going back to this book, by going back to the Bible. This is the primary vehicle whereby God reveals himself and his will for not just our lives as individuals, but his plans and purposes for us as a human race. We want to start with the Bible, and at this point I would direct you back to a series of episodes that we're doing called Embrace the Lockdown, and in it, the second episode, we explore how to read and understand the Bible for ourselves in a very user-friendly way. That there is something there, whether you are fairly advanced in your understanding of the Bible or whether you're just starting out. And I would really encourage you to watch it either on this YouTube channel or this Facebook page. I don't know what platform you're actually watching this video from, but I would really encourage you to go back to that episode and really go back to that entire series and watch it for yourself. But yes, the end result is read the Bible for yourself. This isn't just a book. This isn't just a pile of opinions. This is God's word. This is God's manual about himself, about us, and about life here on planet Earth, a life that is fully aligned to him. So you want to start with that. And I would also say, don't just limit it at that, because God never expected us to find him, to discover him in isolation. That's why we've got a church. God designed the church, this community of believers, to become an incubator for spiritual experience and spiritual growth, and a place where we can encounter God together, where we can learn God together and be realigned with Him together as one big family. So if you're not a church goer, and I know that at this time you will be excused because every church has been closed down, but the moment this lockdown is lifted, do yourself a favor. Find yourself a Bible believing and Bible teaching church and get yourself in it and learn and grow together with us as well. So yes, do just like King Asa did. Learn God for yourself. Discover His ways for yourself. And as you do that, you will be able to recognize that which is an offense to Him and that which is a pleasure to Him. And so once you know these two very neatly distinct camps, okay, there's no gray area here, there's either darkness or light. Once you know what kind of camp God stands in, the things that please Him against the things that offend Him, then it's a matter of realigning our lives according to those standards. Just like King Asa did by putting away the idols, putting away the abominable practices in the nation, putting away even relationships that were toxic, with regards to his mother and her influence over the nation. We kind of need to do the same. Put away anything about our life, our mindsets and our hearts, our walk that is an offense to Him, to embrace things and realities that on the other hand are very much pleasing to Him. And as we do so, that's where we really discover the power of God, because as we cry out to Him to forgive us and to help us to realign our lives to Him, that's exactly what He does. He gives us the strength, He gives us the power, just like King Asa was able to do the impossible. We're not really told how it happened, but we know that it did happen. It will be the same with you. We cannot change ourselves, we cannot change our ways, but God can through the power of His Spirit. And so yes, that's really the secret about realigning ourselves to Him. Rediscover God and His ways by discovering them in the Bible, and not just in isolation, but with one another within a church, within a community of believers, and then putting those realities, those things that we've learned, into practice. Back in the Gospels, okay, in the times of Jesus, someone stopped Him and asked Him the question, what must we do to be doing the works of God? So the implicit question was, what must I do to be realigned to God? And Jesus' answer was very simple. He said, this is the work of God, that you believe in Him whom He has sent, referring to Himself, to Him as the Son of God, sent to planet Earth to take away our sorrows and our sins and our transgressions, to destroy them in His own death and rise on the third day with power and authority to forgive all those who ask to be forgiven, and not only to be forgiven, but to be transformed by the power of God. That's how it all starts. And so maybe you've not done that just yet. Maybe you're considering it. Well, keep moving toward Jesus, and you will find that salvation, you will find that transformation, you will find that realignment with God. Jesus wasn't born before the times of Asa, but had Asa lived in Jesus' times, that's exactly what a realignment would have looked for him. But not only for Asa was that a season of choice, but it was a season of ongoing choice. And I say this, realignment with God, although it may happen in a second almost, although it can happen in a very short span of time, it can even happen between now and the end of the video if you choose to follow Jesus and to be realigned with Him, if you ask Him to forgive you and give you a brand new start. The realignment will begin right there. But the realignment is something that needs to be sustained, is something that needs to be stewarded, something that needs to be worked at, something that needs to be kept on going. Because we can be aligned to our God today and not be aligned to Him tomorrow. Because again, the key to realignment is that obedience is being realigned to God's ways rather than our ways. And let's face it, we can put the indicators on and turn onto another lane at any time that we want. And it's really sad to see this happen to King Asa himself. He was, as I said, a great king that realigned himself and the nation back to God, but that in latter years, kind of, I don't know, maybe he took all of that peace and prosperity and victory for granted. I don't know what happened to his heart, but he slowly but surely stopped relying on God and His ways and started to rely on man and his own ways. As I mentioned earlier, Asa never faced any battles, any wars prior to this point, apart from that major incident with the Ethiopian and Libyan coalition. But then years and years later, another king, King Baasha, okay, this time his brother really, his brother in terms of the king of Israel, okay, so the northern king of Israel kind of came into Judah and wanted to take over. But despite Asa's first-hand experience of God's intervention in battle, you know, with regards to his victory against the Libyans and the Ethiopians, he did not turn to God this time. He thought of turning to an idolatrous and pagan nation, the nation of Syria, to turn to Ben-Hadad, who was one of the partners of the northern kingdom of Israel, one of his allies. He basically emptied the treasury of God's temple, and with it basically paid off the king of Syria to turn his back on Baasha and the kingdom of Israel and come to his aid. And in the natural, from a human point of view, that kind of made sense, and it paid off because Ben-Hadad stepped in with his armies, and as soon as Baasha heard of it, he just withdrew from the land of Judah, and so far so good. Everyone was happy chappy. But then God sent another prophet, the prophet Hanani, and he sent him with not a word of praise like the previous one, but with a word of rebuke. And God basically told him, after what you have seen me do on the battlefield when you were against the Ethiopians and the Libyans, why did you stop relying on me? And why did you start relying on the kingdom of Syria? Now, this is ironic because later on, after that particular generation, the kingdom of Syria would become a great enemy to not just Israel but to Judah itself, and would really inflict all sorts of sorrows and atrocities upon that nation. And so with hindsight, we understand that King Asa shot himself in the foot because God told him, I could have given him in your own hand, but because you've struck a bargain, because you started a covenant with him, you bound yourself to him, the kingdom of Syria will be a thorn in the side of Israel and Judah for many, many years. Anyway, to cut the long story short, King Asa was not impressed with that prophecy, and not only he locked up that prophet for having spoken that message, but his heart became hardened and his rule started to change. And from being a king of justice and righteousness, he started to really abuse and exploit his people. And we read that from that day onwards, his kingdom was just riddled with wars all around. And not only that, we read that 3 years later he developed a disease, an illness to his foot, to his feet. Sorry, we're not really told what it was. Maybe it was gangrene, maybe it was diabetes. We don't know. and that eventually that's the illness that killed him. But we read this very, very sad tale at the end of that story. It says here in verse 12 of chapter 16 that yet even in his disease he did not seek the Lord, but sought help from physicians. Again, he stopped relying on God and his power. He stopped relying on him, and he chose instead to rely on man. And so there is a lesson there for us to be learned. It doesn't matter how strong we start. It's how we end that matters. We may as well have wasted an entire life being disaligned with our God. But if we realign ourselves to him today, that will make all the difference. Likewise, there's no point for us to have been fully aligned to our God and his will back in the days and have lost that in our latter years. No, it doesn't work like that. It's not how well we start, it's how well we finish. And so I really encourage you all at this time of lockdown to consider a full realignment to your God. Let's really make the most of this season to be realigned to him, to rediscover him for ourselves, because it's only once we're fully realigned to him that the blessing will flow. But ultimately he is our best blessing. The blesser really is the ultimate blessing. At this season we could lose anything, but if Christ is with us because we are with him, then we are the richest people on earth. Nothing will ever lack us, yet nothing will ever be our end, because he is our past, our present, our future. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He is our everything. He is our solid rock that cannot be shaken. If we stand in him, we will not be shaken. Yes, floods may come left, right and center, but we will stand. And so let us make the most of this season. Let us be realigned. Don't ask yourself, is God with me? Ask yourself first and foremost, am I with him? Because if you're with him, he is with you. God bless you.